The forest swallowed sound first. Then light. And finally, hope. By the time the last radio transmission cut into static, everyone on the ridge knew SEAL Team Echo was no longer fighting an enemy, they were fighting the dark itself. Night had fallen early under the canopy, a suffocating black that turned the forest into a maze of shadows and whispers. Somewhere beneath those trees, 6 operators were wounded, low on ammo, and surrounded. And the only person who still had eyes on them was a woman they had once doubted would ever belong there. Staff Sergeant Mara Kincaid lay prone on a moss-covered rise, her breath slow, her heartbeat measured. Through her scope, the forest looked like a living thing, branches twisting like veins, shadows pulsing with imagined movement. She had been attached to the team as Overwatch, a sniper inserted separately hours earlier. That separation had saved her. It had also condemned her to a choice no one had planned for. Command was too far. Extraction birds couldn't fly under the storm front rolling in. The enemy controlled the valley trails. Echo team was trapped, and the rescue window was closing by the minute. Mara switched off her scope's glow and closed her eyes for one brief second. She thought of the first day she joined the unit, how conversations stopped when she walked in, how someone had joked that she'd be better suited behind a desk than behind a rifle. She remembered the long nights proving herself, the quiet victories no one applauded, the feeling that she was always being measured against a standard no one else had to meet. Now there was no one left to measure her but herself. She keyed her mic. "Echo, this is Viper 1. I'm coming to you." The pause on the other end was heavy. Then Lieutenant Hayes's voice crackled through, strained but steady. "Negative, Viper. Too many contacts. You'll never make it alone." Mara adjusted her pack and began to move. "Watch me." The forest fought her every step of the way. Roots grabbed at her boots, branches scraped her face, rain slicked the ground into something treacherous and alive. She moved the way she'd been trained, slow when patience mattered, fast when it didn't. Every sound had to be weighed. Every shadow had to be read. She took the first shot from a kneeling position, barely visible through the rain. One enemy dropped without a sound. The second fell moments later. She didn't linger. Snipers survived by never staying where the enemy expected them to be. As she moved, she listened. Not just for footsteps or voices, but for the forest itself. The rhythm of it, the places where silence felt wrong. Echo team was holed up near a dry creek bed, using fallen logs and shattered stone for cover. When Mara finally saw them, it hit her harder than she expected. One operator was bleeding from the leg, another cradled an arm that hung uselessly at his side. Their faces were streaked with mud and exhaustion, eyes hollow from hours of fighting and waiting. She didn't announce herself. She appeared beside them like a ghost. Hayes stared at her for a second too long. "You shouldn't be here." Mara checked their ammo, their injuries, their escape routes. "Doesn't matter. I am." The enemy was closing in. They could hear it now, murmurs, movement, the scrape of boots against wet stone. Mara took control without ceremony. She assigned fields of fire, repositioned the wounded, and marked paths through the underbrush with subtle cuts only trained eyes would notice. They followed her without argument. The first wave came fast. Muzzle flashes lit the forest in violent bursts, turning night into chaos. Mara moved constantly, firing, relocating, guiding the team with hand signals and whispered commands. She was everywhere at once, covering their blind spots, dragging a wounded operator to safety, taking shots no one else could see. At one point, a grenade landed too close. Mara threw herself over it, shoving another SEAL behind a rock. The explosion tore into the earth instead of them, dirt and debris raining down. Her ears rang, her chest burned, but she pushed herself up and kept fighting. Hours blurred together. Pain became background noise. Fear became fuel. When the storm finally broke overhead, lightning split the sky, revealing the forest in stark flashes of white. In one of those moments, Mara saw the path they needed, the narrow ravine that led out of the valley, invisible without the storm's light. She led them through it, one by one, covering their retreat until the last man was clear. The enemy tried to follow, but the forest that had once trapped Echo team now worked against their pursuers. Mara used it, guiding the team higher, farther, toward the extraction point she'd calculated in her head. When the helicopter finally appeared, its rotors cutting through the rain like a promise, no one spoke. They were too tired, too relieved, too aware of how close they had come to never seeing daylight again. On the ride back, Hayes sat across from Mara, his face pale under the cabin lights. "You saved us," he said quietly. All of us. Mara shook her head. We saved each other. But they both knew the truth. When the forest had closed in, when command had gone silent and hope had thinned to almost nothing, one person had chosen to step forward instead of stepping back. One person had walked alone into the dark so others wouldn't have to die there. Weeks later, the story spread through the unit, not as a legend, but as a reminder of what courage really looked like, of how leadership wasn't about rank or recognition, but about responsibility. About doing the hard thing when no one else could. Mara never asked for praise. She returned to her post, to the quiet patience of the scope and the long waits no one saw. But something had changed. The looks she received were different now. Not doubt, not surprise, respect. And somewhere deep in that dark forest, the echoes of that night remained, a testament to what happens when someone refuses to let fear decide the ending. Because sometimes, the strongest light doesn't come from flares or firepower. Sometimes, it comes from one person who chooses to lead, even when the path ahead is nothing but darkness.